There's the obvious ways that you can curb appetite when you're fasting. Talked about them before. Green tea, coffee, MCT oil, sorta, because it kind of breaks the fast. But there's also newer things. I mean, I've been running this channel for 10 years, so there's always new things that are coming in. So revised for this year, some new things that you could add that really won't break a fast, with the exception of one kind of breaks it. But given the advent of all this new FGF21 sugar fasting stuff, I think it's somewhat fair game. So let's talk about all these. First one that I'm going to mention is tyrosine. Now, there's an interesting paper that was published looking at tyrosine. It was published in the journal Psychiatric Research. Now, what's interesting about this, when you first look at this study, you're like, hey, this shows us that tyrosine doesn't really work. Doesn't work at all. It doesn't support neurotransmitter function, which is what it's supposed to do. But if you look further at the study, you find that tyrosine does become highly effective if you're depleted in a given neurotransmitter. So tyrosine is sort of a precursor for dopamine, even norepinephrine, to a certain degree serotonin, but really dopamine is what we're looking at. And when your dopamine levels are low, you're looking for these hits all the time. Have you ever noticed that when you're hungry, you might go scroll your phone more, or you might just engage in something that's a little bit more like giving you that hit of dopamine, one that you might ordinarily get from food, but maybe you're fasting, so you go somewhere else. Well, a lot of times it is a baseline dopamine level that's coming down. And if you are exuding a lot of willpower to get through a fast, you're going to deplete dopamine pretty quick, especially if you're just overstimulated, you got a lot going on anyway. So this journal Psychiatric Research paper was really interesting because it actually showed the opposite of what a lot of people think. It shows that taking tyrosine, like in the amount of 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams, doesn't really do anything if your baseline dopamine levels are where they should be. But when they become depleted, it actually helps a ton. It repletes those neurotransmitters. So this is huge for hunger drive, because there's this thing that I call food noise. Food noise is just that constant buzzing of thinking about food that you don't realize is taking up much of your processing energy. So it's a cheap supplement. It works really, really well. I'd highly recommend just trying maybe 2 grams or so on days where you're feeling like, I really want to give in. It works on days you're just dieting too, not just with fasting. Okay, so the next one is really interesting. There is newer evidence coming out on calcium. This is so wild. We might just simply eat until our calcium needs are met. And this is legit. There's real stuff there. There was a study published in the Proceedings of Journal Nutrition, another study that was published in Nutrition Journal itself. And both of these found in human studies, calcium makes it so that you eat less. In fact, one of the studies, they gave subjects 500 milligrams of calcium with their orange juice in the morning, and then another group got a placebo. When it came to lunchtime, the group that had the calcium ate over 116 calories less on average. So they ate less, their appetite was under control. Now, if I could get into the mechanisms, real quick, essentially what's going on is when dietary calcium is high, intracellular calcium is lower, which allows for up to 65% less fatty acid synthase. So fatty acids don't form, fat cells don't form, but also it 2x's lipolysis. So it doubles the amount of fats that are liberated into the bloodstream and can ultimately get oxidized during a fast. What this will do is when you have more fats going into the bloodstream from your tissue, it's going to satiate you more. You've accelerated the amount of fatty acids in your bloodstream, so your brain feels satiated, so it curbs your hunger and it burns extra fat, which is kind of nice. The next one is one that is really interesting that I've talked about before from a different angle, but getting good electrolytes in general. Sodium, I've talked about from a hunger standpoint, right? Hunger can be curbed with salt oftentimes because these NST neurons. So a lot of times when we're craving sweet things, we really just need salt, which is perfect to have during a fast. Put a pinch of salt in water, great. But now we're learning from a study that's published in Electrolytes and Performance, like a large narrative review, that essentially when you have salt and potassium, it's increasing the nerve impulse in your brain, into your muscles. So you're literally getting more energy. So then we're seeing more evidence that the more energy you have and the more that you move, the more it curbs your appetite. So these are double whammy approaches. Not to mention I still rope calcium in as an electrolyte. So calcium being the last thing I talked about for appetite, it's still really darn important, and I consider it an electrolyte. I put a link down below for the electrolytes I use. Most of you know by now I use LMNT. I use the stick packs a lot of times, but a lot of times I use the sparkling drinks too. It's just because it feels like I'm drinking a soda, and I don't know, it just curbs the appetite. It feels really good. So that link down below, been using them for 7 years. years. That link is going to get you a free sample variety pack with any purchase. So you just go to drinklmnt.com/Thomas. But they always have new seasonal flavors that come out. And, one of them that's really interesting is their lemonade salt, which is a really, really good one. Literally tastes like lemonade. And we're talking something that has negligible amounts of calories. Absolutely will be okay if you're in a fasted state. But if you're really concerned about even the small amount of calories that can come in a stick pack because of just the powder that you have to have, it technically has a couple grams of just volume to it, go for the sparkling ones. Those are entirely fasting friendly, as there's no powder or constituent that would give you even those calories that you might get in trace amounts in the stick packs. So that link is down below in the top line of the description. Next one is bee pollen. Okay, now hold up for just a second. Bee pollen technically has calories. And put it in the same category as like MCT oil. MCT oil breaks a fast, but the net positive of the MCT oil might actually be there. You might get more out of your fast by having a little MCT oil, right? So does it break a fast by literal technical terms? Yes. Anything that has calories would technically break your fast, but MCT oil could be pretty beneficial. I've talked about that numerous times. But bee pollen is a whole different ball game. Yes, couple grams of carbs and a couple grams of protein in, a couple tablespoons, but you don't even need that much, like 1 tablespoon. It is one of the most concentrated sources of B vitamins and A, D, C, E, and K, like huge array of vitamins that are in it. It's probably the most concentrated multivitamin food that you can get in nature, absent beef liver. And even then, like the variety of vitamins that are in bee pollen really even rivals beef liver in some ways, just slightly different. More vitamin A in beef liver, obviously. But there's a study published in Pharmaceutical Sciences that found that the anti-inflammatory effects of bee pollen, in rodents, they did this study where they induced inflammation with carrageenan. They made them inflamed, and then they gave them either a direct infusion of saline or a direct infusion of bee pollen extract. The results were wild. Bee pollen significantly reduced exudate volume, leukocyte accumulation, granulation tissue weight, angiogenesis, VEGF, and tumor necrosis factor alpha. So essentially, it turned off this massive inflammatory cascade or inflammation overdrive. Definitely what you want while you're fasting, but also hugely beneficial when you break a fast to help curb the appetite and just give you a little bit more like control, right? So how does this influence appetite? Well, for one, the wide variety of different vitamins that you're getting in there can satisfy this kind of primal need to eat in order to get adequate nutrition. Just like the calcium thing, like science is starting to show that maybe we eat until we meet our calcium needs because calcium is so imperative. Well, maybe we eat until we get adequate nutrition. And when we get such a concentration of nutrition, maybe it ends up curbing the appetite. The same could potentially be said for a multivitamin in some ways, but I find that the B vitamins and bee pollen like give you this energy boost that makes you not want to eat. Not to mention the quercetin and some of these other things that could be beneficial. Now, I know what some of you are thinking that watch a lot of my videos. Is this something that, because it's an anti-inflammatory and antioxidant, is it not good to take during a fast since we want the stress of the fast in the first place? Like, would this negate the stress of a fast? And the bottom line is, to a certain degree, yes. But if it's something that gets you through a fast better, then I think there comes a time and a place where it's okay. I actually kind of want to experiment with things where I do like bee pollen fasting, where I fast for a couple of days, but I have bee pollen, so I still get adequate nutrition in. Because I find that's, for me as an athlete, something that is problematic. Like I'll fast, but then I'm just depleted in a lot of different nutrients, right? The last one, based on the study that was published in Pharmaceuticals, was the use of ginseng. Now, ginseng can give you energy, but ginseng is also an adaptogen. So it's in a similar category in this particular study with like rhodiola and ashwagandha, but I use ginseng in this case, and I've done videos on like Korean ginseng. I think it's great stuff, and I think it has huge properties for energy perspective, but we're starting to see that it actually works as an adaptogen. So when your cortisol levels are heightened during a fast, if they're heightened during the appropriate times, like in the morning, it might actually curb your appetite and work in your favor. But when cortisol starts to go up at kind of inopportune times, it triggers this stress drive to eat. One gentle pulse in the morning of cortisol is kind of normal. It tells your body, hey, you're getting up, you're getting going. It gives you the pulse that you need to actually get moving. But when it happens midday and at these weird times, it's like you get this stress response that says, I need to go get food and eat. So we're finding that ginseng, as well as rhodiola and ashwagandha, I'm just not as big of a fan of those two, can be really beneficial for balancing cortisol and actually is helping to recalibrate and find homeostasis with these stress hormones. Essentially, you're rebalancing your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is going to help with the fatigue, but also help with the stress eating. This is one of those that might take a couple days to kick in, so it's not something you always will feel immediately. The idea behind an adaptogen is you want to take it when you're exposed to the stressor, especially with ginseng where it's a little more acute. For example, something like ashwagandha builds in your system, rhodiola builds in your system, and ginseng does too to a degree. But if you had ginseng like only on the days you're exposed to the stressor, you would elevate your baseline to accommodate that stressor. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't get the benefit of the fast. I mean, you might decrease it a tiny bit because you're accommodating the stressor, but you would still get the benefit of the caloric restriction that leads to the weight loss, what you're probably after for the most part, or at least the weight maintenance. So just to recap here again real quick, sodium is really great. Electrolytes in general, okay? 500 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams calcium before your fast, or at the very least adequate calcium the day before going into your fast. So get enough calcium in the way of dairy, yogurt, things like that. Tyrosine, 2 to 3 grams. And you don't have to do all these together. 2 to 3 grams of tyrosine at the beginning of your fast, or even like when you're starting to feel like you're hungry, things like that. Bee pollen, adding bee pollen. If you are going for a longer fast, 24, 36 hours, add a little bit of bee pollen at 20 hours to get you through those last few hours or extend your fast a little bit longer. It's like a bee pollen extender. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. We'll see you tomorrow.